37-year-old man was walking to work, and on his way, a bomb exploded right next to him. Some shrapnels from the bomb hit him, and he ended up wounded at the hospital on the verge of life and death. It took a while for him to be able to get out of the hospital, but during that while, the country got decimated. His company no longer existed. His partner, he couldn't get contact with her, and he had to seek refuge. He found himself in the southern part of the Netherlands, very rural, doesn't speak the language. He's in a refugee camp, and he's trying to figure out his life.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Today, we've got an exciting episode with two individuals, Roy Baladi and Eugène van den Hemel. In 2020, Roy Baladi was moments away from the port of Beirut when it exploded. It nearly cost him his life. Meanwhile, 2,500 miles away in the Netherlands, Eugène van den Hemel met with struggling refugees to help connect them to a brighter future. An unexpected twist of events would eventually bring these two men together to help hundreds of underrepresented people find work, aspiration, and hope. We begin the podcast by speaking with Roy. Roy's the founder of Jobs for Humanity. We talk about his near-death experience and how it launched him on his current mission, helping those farthest from employment find good work. We also talk about neurodivergent employees, common employer stigmas and biases, and how to break these biases. And we talk about the large pools of talent that companies overlook because of those biases. About halfway through the episode, I switched to speaking with Eugène, a professional recruiter who left his high-paying corporate job in the Netherlands to help underrepresented people connect with new careers. Eugène and I discuss how he built deep relationships in forgotten communities and used those relationships to help 800 underrepresented people, particularly refugees, find new jobs and new hope. Okay, if you enjoy this episode and want to advance the cause of building better work, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And now, my conversation with Roy Baladi and Eugène van den Hemel. Roy Baladi and Eugène van den Hemel, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thank you for having us.
It is a completely natural thing that a show called Work for Humans would have leaders of an organization called Jobs for Humanity on the show. And your mission is so ambitious. Let's start with that. And I should mention for listeners that you're in Lebanon. Roy's in Lebanon. Eugène is in the Netherlands. Roy doesn't have electricity right now, which is impressive that he can still be on this call. And so he's gone out onto his front porch where there's light, but you can hear the rain in the background because it's raining in Lebanon right now. And so you're going to hear that. This is an action show. We've got lots of stuff going on. So Roy, what's the mission of Jobs for Humanity?
Jobs for Humanity is on a quest to create the largest number of jobs for people who come from underrepresented communities. In the Netherlands, we call them distant to the labor market. Our laser focus is on one particular day in 2030. The United Nations is going to get together and review the Sustainable Development Goals that they set back in 2015. They set 17 goals, some for poverty reduction, some for clean energy, some for quality jobs for all, some for reducing inequalities. Our mission is goal number 8, which is quality jobs for all. And we're going to measure that based on the number of people who got hired between now and 2030. We started this in 2020, and that's our 10-year goal.
What does all mean for you?
Anyone who comes from a community where the unemployment rate is higher than the national average would be considered all. So in the United States, for example, the unemployment rate is about 3 to 4%. In Europe, it's about 4 to 5%. So when you think of refugees, their unemployment rate is at 50%. The blind, it's at 36%. The neurodivergent, their underemployment rate is 80%. Single moms, they're at 13%. Ethnic minorities are at around that number. Formerly incarcerated, around that number. So any group who's distant to the labor market. So now you can think of the elderly, the deaf, people subject to human trafficking, the LGBTQ, ultimately one minus white males.
That is fascinating. And so, Roy, you are building essentially, I'm going to say a business, but it's probably a social entrepreneurial, a social impact organization that enables that. What do these communities share in common as challenges as they come into the workforce? And then we'll talk about what some of these communities have in terms of differences.
There is stigma on the employer front when it comes to all these communities, and the stigma comes from different places. And then on the individual side, there's trauma. Let me unpack this for a second. When you're talking about someone who was incarcerated, the stigma comes in the form of I'm fear for the worst. Am I going to have someone who has murdered someone or had raped someone? And I completely disregard people who were incarcerated because they had smoked a joint or because of financial misconduct or because of theft and robbery, or if it's violence, it was against a member of another gang. Completely under not thinking about the privilege that we have and then the fact, in most cases, that they grew up in areas where there were no role models. They didn't have access to education or proper schooling. So the bias is very limited, that stigma. Now let's jump to another community, refugees. When we speak to someone who doesn't speak the language like we do, because they have had to come from another country where the primary language was Arabic or Farsi or Afghani or Ukrainian or Vietnamese, they're going to speak with a lot more. I mean, it's a second language versus your first language. And the stigma that we might get is they may not be as good as we are. They may not think as fast. They may not be as smart. Forgetting the fact that this other person may have been a dentist who's actually removed 500 cavities and built a whole dentistry practice and is coming in right now, and we don't realize if this is something that they can or can't do. Now let's transport it to the blind. We don't even know if a blind person, if you can trust a blind person, or if a blind person is capable of being a programmer or build design systems or build complex presentations, just because we don't know what tools they use. We've never been educated on that. We don't know if a blind person could have been blind from birth, or they could have lost their eyesight halfway through their lives. And then all the skills that they had built, they have, but we don't see that. We don't give them that much of a chance. That's a stigma. It's that same stigma seen differently. And I can tell you the same thing about the elderly when it comes to being able to be quick and fast and nimble or tech savvy. We can apply that to the neurodivergent stigma, because when you're having someone who's not looking at you, may not be looking at you in the eyes, or maybe like stimming, or maybe thinking without necessarily giving you that firm handshake, is not the best presenter. And therefore, we might think that, hey, they're not going to be as fun to have a drink with, or they may not be as good as someone else. And all of this stigma is on the employer front. And now you can talk about trauma on the candidate front, depending on each of their individual circumstances.
So as you go through that list of people, Roy, who are facing these challenges, and you talk about the biases that they face, I feel those biases. And some of the best people I've ever worked with were neurodistinct. Also a lot of work sometimes to work with. Absolutely extraordinary to work with, ultimately. I'm afraid of, and you call people coming out of prison returning citizens, which I think is a beautiful name. But I'd be concerned about hiring somebody coming out of prison, even though I have relatives in prison who I worry very much about what they are going to face when they come out of prison at the age of 55. And I don't know how they're going to survive. And so how do you work through bridging that bias? How do you talk to companies about the value that these populations can bring that they may not recognize? And how do you get past those biases?
It's actually a lot simpler than you might realize, because these biases are somewhat limited, because we've built a training program for refugees, one for the neurodivergent, one for the blind and low vision, one for returning citizens. Each one is about an hour worth of training. And then we said, why don't we build one for full inclusion? And that turned out to be an hour and a half of worth of training. So you can literally, within an hour, and a half train anyone to be able to identify some of these biases and these stigmas that they have, know what to do in order to create an inclusive hiring process, from an interview process to what are the reasonable accommodations that they may need, to what are the technologies that would be helpful and would not be helpful. And then how do you onboard someone if you want to hire them, and how do you offboard someone if it doesn't work out? And how do you create a safe space for them once they're at the organization? But in order to give something that's a bit more concrete, there's that training that we've put together for all walks of life. And then in order to retain that training, because the hard part is not knowing what it is, because how often do you read a book and then 2 months later you try to recount it and you can recount 2 or 3 ideas, but not the whole thing, is we pair you with 2 job seekers in your field of work, in your city, who come from these communities, and we ask you to help them find a job. And therefore, when you meet them, you start to see the biases that you may have. When you help them with your resume, you start to see that non-standard resume, and you start to understand the link between this and that, between their story and what you see on paper. And then you start to help them through the interview process, so on and so forth. So by having the opportunity to mentor 2 job seekers and help them get a job, you then not just retain the information and give a chance to 2 people to really change their lives, because how often does someone get a mentor in that field? But you also get to really retain everything and then bring that back to your own organization. So what we're doing at Jobs for Humanity now is putting together that program on a monthly basis where it's an open enrollment. Anyone at the organization can come and join, and then we'll give them that training and pair them with 2 job seekers where they'll do the follow-ups with them. And it's been wildly successful.
I'd love if you would tell a story of somebody who started off from a position of, very far from being able to make it into the workforce, and how they progressed through your program into full employment.
I'm going to talk to you about Roland. Roland is 61 years old. He is from Canada, I believe, Ottawa. Reached out to him because I'm one of the mentors. Eugène is one of the mentors. Eugène doesn't just inspire people to believe in themselves. He's inspired me to believe and start Jobs for Humanity. If it wasn't for Eugène, I don't know if I would have had the guts to genuinely really believe in this thing. And that's a whole story in and of itself. But I'm going to tell you the story about Roland. 61-year-old, has been in sales, and he's been getting rejected. And he just doesn't get any response or any feedback as to why he's getting rejected. So the key there was for him to be able to get introductions to the recruiter and to be able to make his case and to turn his experience into a strength. And so the trick that we've used here is not just use the jobs on Jobs for Humanity in order to identify the roles for him, but also because we have relationships with the recruiters, and we can also find the entire hiring team on LinkedIn, that we went and sent them direct messages that tell them, hey, I realize that I'm not your typical candidate. In a tech startup, you're looking for fast-paced individuals, and I am oftentimes not the first case, but the experience that I bring and the maturity that I can bring in order to ground people, to make them understand the value of showing up early, preparing for meetings, and understanding the various personas that we have, because I have so much experience in understanding who's on the other side of that sales conversation, that you're going to be able to, and they're going to be able to accelerate their learning and close at a much higher rate. And I don't know if you can say that about many candidates who can bring that strength.
Did it work?
It worked. He called me back. He's like, I'm getting interview after interview. And then within 2 months, he had landed a job.
What was it about him that made it hard for him to get into the workforce? Was it age?
Ageism.
Yeah. I'll tell you, one of the most difficult challenges I've seen, especially in Silicon Valley, is women who are in their 60s and lose a role that is very hard to get back into high tech after that. And I'm talking about people who were executives in user experience at Apple for a decade, and then have a hard time coming back in because ageism, especially towards women in high tech, I think is very, very severe.
Yeah. Can I share another story?
Oh, yeah. Tell another story. And then I want to hear your story about how Eugène inspired you.
Yeah. So I'm going to take you back to where I am right now. I'm in Lebanon. The electricity's off. I'm drinking my coffee and it's raining outside. A third of the country is Syrian refugees. My grandfather migrated from Syria, and I was raised when our parents split up by a Palestinian lady who had sought refuge from Palestine, and she raised me from since I was 8 to 18 until I moved to the US, and my schooling and career took off. In Syria in 2013, a war erupted like this. Protests came in, and it very quickly became political, and you started to have Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, the United States, and Israel all meddle into it, and it just tore the country apart. Putting politics aside, there was a 37-year-old man, and like him are millions, because some of these millions are in Lebanon right now. 37-year-old man was walking to work. He's a designer. And on his way, a bomb exploded right next to him. Some shrapnels from the bomb hit him, and he ended up wounded at the hospital. I don't remember when he told me that, if he was in a coma or if he was just on the verge of life and death. He was engaged, and it took a while for him to be able to get out of the hospital. But during that while, the country got decimated. His company no longer existed. His partner had to find something for herself, and he couldn't get contact with her, and he had to seek refuge. And the place where he had to seek refuge was the Netherlands. That was his option. For this person who is an exceptional artist, and if you go on jobsforhumanity.com and you click on the very first video, you'll see his story, him sharing his own story, and you'll see some of his artwork as he shares his story. He had to get on a ship, pay a good amount of what he had left, he was able to muster, to a person that he didn't know. Get on this ship, and with a lot of people, and it wasn't a big ship, it was a little dinghy boat, and cross over, make it to the Netherlands. On its way, I don't know the exact detail, but the boat, I don't know if it was hit or not, or if it was of poor quality, but it started sinking. Luckily, the Coast Guard saved him, and then he got another boat to get him to the Netherlands. He was in the southern part of the Netherlands, very rural. He found himself, doesn't speak the language. His English is very, very weak. His primary language is Arabic. He's in a refugee camp, and he's trying to figure out his life. For 4 years, he was not able to get things really going. And he had really lost hope. And all types of attempts were futile. Then he met a guy who I had spoken to, and I told, hey, I'm organizing a conference in Amsterdam. We're going to have 450 heads of recruitment, and we'd like to have 450 job seekers who come from underrepresented communities, distant to the labor market, that we'd like to invite. And this guy was Eugène. And Eugène told me, Roy, if you tell me we need to bring 100 refugees, I'll bring 100. If you need me to bring 200, I'll bring 200. And the conference happened. Eugène was there. He was one of our speakers. And we invited as a closing keynote 450 job seekers from underrepresented communities, elderly, returning citizens, LGBTQ people subject to human trafficking who were behind the red light district, refugees, so on and so forth. One of them was Ali. And Eugène, through the invitation, Ali got to meet 2 individuals at the conference. The Netherlands is so inclusive that people ended up staying post the close of the conference for another 3 hours to meet people, to meet one another. And a lot of conversations happened. And a guy named Bas Westland, who is a recruiter there, introduced him to several organizations. And then one of them resulted into a job as a designer at Van Lascott Kempen.
That's fantastic. And there's so much in that story. So part of the story is that there's a history of challenges that contains a lot of trauma. And then there's this state of being on the outside, and the feeling of being on the outside of the market, and the feeling of being undervalued by or unvalued or invisible to the market, right, for jobs. And the desperation that people must feel. Some of the research about many marginalized communities has to do with the rate of suicide. And I have to think that feeling of being on the outside of the job market and unable to provide for your family or unable to take care of yourself is a contributor to that. There's another piece here which this is sort of a macro piece, which is lately I've been studying a lot about the demographic challenges of different nations and how many of them are lacking the age groups that they need to actually sustain their economies for the long run. And so the possibility that, especially in the case of refugees, that some of those demographic challenges could be mitigated if we could get past the biases we have toward people from other countries.
Absolutely. It's just a knowledge gap that we have. It's very unfortunate that we have these biases and we don't understand even what neurodiversity means, let alone the different subgroups. I am sure that our listeners may not know what is the difference between autism, Asperger's, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dyslexia, Tourette syndrome, and nor is it part of your everyday education. But if I come and tell you that 25 to 33% of the world's population is neurodivergent, and to hit it home, if you don't think that you know one, and you work at a company that has at least 100 employees, let alone thousands, then 25 to 33 of the 100 employees are neurodivergent. And many times people don't even know they are and haven't been diagnosed yet, and there are diagnoses for that. So the training is super helpful to be able to create an inclusive workspace for everyone and operate at a much better level. And so when you are part of the 66%, part of the majority, you then therefore have customs and activities and actions that you do that you don't think about, and they're called normal. And everybody else in this abnormal category. But you know what? If you include them, you're much more likely to succeed. Because if I were to tell you that some of the world's biggest geniuses come from these communities, you would then have to think twice if your intention is to build the most competitive and most successful organization, be surrounded by the best minds in the future, in the world. If I were to tell you, what do Einstein, Freddie Mercury, Sergey Brin, Nietzsche, Bob Marley, and Madeleine Albright have in common?
Absolutely no idea.
They were all refugees.
Really?
Einstein sought refuge from Germany because he was being persecuted. Nietzsche from the Czech Republic, I believe. Bob Marley from Jamaica, moved to the UK. So if you're talking about people who are creating genres of music, be it Freddie Mercury or Bob Marley, or you're talking about people who get to the highest ranks of politics, like Madeleine Albright, or people who are literally are at the forefront of artificial intelligence, Sergey Brin, or someone who's literally is the smartest mind on earth, physicist in Einstein, or the person who's created psychoanalysis, they're all refugees. And there are so many more examples. Then you'll be stunned and you realize, okay, maybe it's worth taking an hour and a half of my time learning what it takes in order to reduce these biases and do a positive outreach and reach out to them and mentor a couple, because this investment in them, which will really change their lives, because it's unfortunate that 50% of refugees are unemployed. When this list of 6 extraordinary individuals and counting come from there, then you will not just change people's lives, but you will change your entire organization. It's much better than watching a Netflix series.
Can you do a similar list for the neurodistinct?
Sure. There are some people who are allegedly neurodivergent, others who have opened up and said they are. So I'm going to combine both and I'll tell you who falls in which. But openly, Elon Musk has Asperger's. Sir Richard Branson has dyslexia. Michael Phelps has ADHD. Simone Biles has ADHD. So when you talk about people who are at the point of sports and you think they're the most focused humans, and then you realize that they have ADHD, then that makes you think a little more about the biases that might have come in your mind when someone tells you, I do have ADHD, and you might think of one, hire them or not. Isaac Newton, Bill Gates are also allegedly neurodivergent, and so is Einstein.
And so is my former CEO, John Chambers, is dyslexic. In fact, when we used to design tools, we would design the tools with the understanding that if there was an approval path that got to the CEO, we needed to have really robust abilities for other people to do the approvals, because he didn't do the approvals. And what that meant for him in particular, and I hope to interview him someday, is that his memory was extraordinary. One of the best speakers ever. One of the most accomplished public speakers I've ever experienced. So that's super interesting. Can you tell me the story of Eugène persuading you that Jobs for Humanity was feasible?
No persuasion was needed. It was the instant results that we saw. When Eugène brought 100 plus refugees at the conference I was putting together, Hiring Success, and we saw 450 recruiters, and I'm talking about the global head of recruitment at Heineken, recruitment execs, top level execs at IKEA, Booking, N26, so on and so forth. So top organizations stay beyond the 5 p.m. of a conference, and usually people leave before, and stay till 8 or 9 p.m. to meet people and open up their networks. Halfway through, I saw Eugène, he saw me, we ran, and the first time in our lives, because we had coordinated through phone calls before, we hugged each other, and then we were both sobbing on each other's shoulders, realizing that this actually happened. This idea that, hey, Eugène, what do you think we can do? And he's like, absolutely, let's do it. How many things we can get? Well, as many as you want, Roy. Okay, perfect. Call them then. They come to me at that time. Yes, absolutely, we'll do. My recruiters show up. His job seekers show up. And then many people get jobs through it. Many people get upskilled. And they're still hired till this moment. I realized that this is something that can be scaled globally. And this is something that has a chance to transform humanity, and hence the name.
How have employers responded to the hires that they've made?
I'll give you an example with Booking.com. With Booking, we didn't just publish their jobs and bring in a much larger, diverse slate of candidates to their jobs than corporations naturally traditionally get. But we also had our first cohort where we coached 21 of their recruiters, including their head of talent acquisition, and then followed it up by pairing them with 2 Ukrainian refugees each. So 21 recruiters, 42 refugees. The result after 6 weeks was 10, and a few weeks later was 13 of the 43 got hired, got jobs, some at Booking, most outside of Booking, and 22 more got interviews. And the response of Booking was, let's do it company-wide this year. And this is an initiative that we're starting now to try and invite as many employees as are interested among the 10,000 plus that they have through those, because anybody can come and join a monthly recurring training session. And then we have more than 100,000 job seekers, so we can pair them all. And therefore, that becomes a complete transformation of an organization with a very simple program and process that also gives so much help to double the number of employees that participate in terms of job seekers. And let alone, after you have that knowledge and that skill set and the candidates who come through, how many more people will you be hiring from underrepresented communities? And at some point, the idea of what we're doing is to make diversity not an issue anymore, because won't be an issue anymore once we go through that program, and then we're able to diversify their hiring pool and create an inclusive hiring process and inclusive workspace for people.
I have to admit that as an employer, if I thought that there was a rich source of candidates, talented candidates, that other companies were overlooking, and that I could go into that space and actually have access to that population, it'd be incredibly attractive. I think one of the things that you said early on was that you show people how to offboard if it doesn't work out. And what's attractive to me about that is that it lowers the risk profile, which is that if I'm thinking about hiring you and you're different from me in some way, then I'm scared. I'm scared that I'm going to get somebody into the company and it's going to be a problem and I have to deal with it. But if I can lower the risk profile of bringing somebody on board, that would help a lot. How do you manage that?
It's important to realize that when someone comes from an underrepresented community, their unemployment rate is so high that any opportunity for an interview is already a huge win for them. Any feedback across all, like ultimately, the offboarding is give feedback. The offboarding is also open up your network. And so it's regardless of what you saw in them, be they having a very slim resume because they were a returning citizen, or because their resume looks very different because they're a refugee, or because their resume is extremely detail-oriented because they're neurodivergent, or because the resume has some spelling mistakes because they are blind. Feedback is all they need. An openness to be able to coach them or introduce them to organizations is really what they need. Now, what happens when you hire someone from one of these communities is the exact opposite of your fears. If you hire someone who was in prison, you are giving a chance to someone who has been told no so many times. What are you going to get? You're going to get the first one in, the last one out, the hardest worker, the most grateful person, an extremely collaborative person, an extremely humble person. So this is exactly what comes down, what your job description comes down to, really. All of that can be really coached. And oftentimes they're not going to come in with huge salary expectations. And so it's okay for them to come from the ground up, but the skills that they have built in prison and the amount of grit that it takes for someone to be able to go back and forgive either themselves or someone that has done them wrong, having grown in a very poor neighborhood with most chances are no role model parents, may have been into drugs, may have been into violence, one of them may not have been present, may have been in gangs, and where you have been indoctrinated in a tough environment. For you to go from this to be able to spend so much of your time in prison, in a cell, on your own, and be able to overcome all that, everything that's been pushed on you from gangs, these sometimes are hard for people to be able to digest, but you're going to have the most determined, clear-eyed, open-hearted, and non-entitled person that you can imagine. The benefits are extremely high when you give someone a chance, especially if you just asked your head of HR, what is our annual employee turnover? And if the answer is more than 10 or 15 or 20%, you're going to reduce that turnover. And you're not going to be training somebody for a year who's going to leave after a year. You're going to have somebody who's going to be your biggest advocate.
Fantastic. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask you the closing questions because your computer's going to die and I'm conscious of it. And there's a couple of things I know we want to touch upon. So one of them is, can you say something about what Eugène has done that positions him for Recruiter of the Year?
Eugène has been nominated for Recruiter of the Year in the Netherlands and as part of Jobs for Humanity Agency of the Year, so nominated twice. And Eugène has done something that I don't think you'll even find it if you open the Guinness Book of Records. He has placed more than 800 refugees in paying jobs. And I believe he started in 2015. So in less than 8 years, 800 individuals who have been completely supplanted, who English or Dutch is not their primary language, who didn't have a work authorization or work permit, who had to figure out their whole family situation and get acclimated into a new country, were able to get a paying job thanks to Eugène. And no wonder Eugène is in the lead, because you have those individuals who are like, I can absolutely attest to what Eugène has done. And the proof in the pudding is if you go on Jobs for Humanity and you click on Ali's Barakat story, it's 100% credit to Eugène. So that's what he's done.
Fantastic. The question I always ask at the end as a part of the close is this one. And it's a weird question, which is, Roy, what job do you hire your job to do for you?
What job do I hire my job to do for me?
Your job hires you to do something for it. What do you hire it to do for you?
I hire my job to keep everybody I speak to motivated and clear-eyed as to why we're here and why we're doing this. Because if our goal is to be the leading contributor to UN Sustainable Development Goal number 8, to bring in the most number of jobs, it's going to take 3 to tango. It's going to take an employer to say, okay, I believe and I'm in. So job number 1 is to be able to convince an employer to say, hey, I'm going to hire. B, I'm cool with the training. And C, if I'm going to mentor, I'm in. 2, people from various community organizations who work like Lighthouse for the Blind, Be My Eyes, who work with these job seekers to say, I'm on board because this is a genuine chance for me to be able to hire people, to get my job seekers hired. And it's also a genuine chance for me to get introduced to so many more job seekers. And third, is to motivate our internal team to always know what north is, because oftentimes in environmental climates change. In corporations, its oxygen is money. You run out of money, you run out of operation. And if with money comes the element of time, and if money is not on your side, time is not on your side, you get cringed, and therefore you're not able to operate at a level where you're like, hey, I want to be extremely generous and give all the support that's needed, that goes over and beyond in order to make everyone successful. And so if you motivate the team to always know the why and to be very clear about where we're at socially, financially, what is our goal, then everybody will be fully aligned. So the job I want to do for me is honesty, integrity, and persuasion of always letting every constituent know what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it.
What does your job cost you?
To be honest, I self-funded Jobs for Humanity to start for the first couple of years. So a good amount of my savings to get started, and donations have helped quite a bit. But now we're at a stage where it's growing and multiplying. But I definitely gave up with zero regret being the chief marketplace officer of two organizations, Silicon Valley startups, that I quit one day to the next. I had an awakening, and that was on August 4th, 2020, when I was driving in Lebanon down towards the port of Beirut, and then all of a sudden I saw the sky went yellow, and I saw an apocalypse in front of me. And it was the explosion of the port of Beirut. Everything just exploded. Luckily, I survived because I was about less than a kilometer away from the port. And I was able to live that day and help a few people along the way. Went to sleep. Next morning, called friends, and they're like, we're back at the explosion spot and we're cleaning someone's home. Went and I joined them and started cleaning people's homes. And I realized that mundane tasks can be so much more fulfilling than the most lavish C-level job in the Bay Area. And therefore, I decided to quit and called Eugène.
When that explosion happened, lots of people decided to leave Lebanon. You, on the other hand, decided to go back or to stay.
Yeah.
And, I will tell you what, people don't know about that explosion. I don't think in the United States know just what a disaster that was, and a disaster in the context of very severe economic challenges in Lebanon right now.
Hence, no electricity.
That's why you don't have electricity right now. How can people learn more about Jobs for Humanity?
Go to jobsforhumanity.com. Everything's clean and clear there.
Fantastic. And if I'm an employer, I'm going to find information there. If I'm a job seeker, I'm going to find information there.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Roy. That was fascinating.
Thank you, Dart.
Roy mentioned Eugène van den Hemel's immense positive impact on both Roy's life and on Jobs for Humanity. I now bring you my conversation with Eugène, starting with how he discovered his own passion for helping others. Eugène, how did you get involved so actively in representing the underrepresented in employment?
I had a career as a recruiter in the job placement industry, big company. But after 3-4 years, I had the idea that I was only talking about the color of the company cars and the quality and the quantity of the incentives, and not anymore about passion for work. And I felt alone, I felt poor, and I decided to quit. But I was in a very commercial position. So when you quit, it goes very fast, and they say, hey, there's a door, bye-bye. And I thought by myself, I can go to another company, big company, but I believe they will be exactly the same. So I started for myself. That was 12 years, 13 years ago. I'm not an entrepreneur, but I have an entrepreneurial mind. I thought, hey, I want to really match people because that's where I'm good in. I'm going to start with working with people who are really demanding for support, who really need help. That was the start.
And when you say that you left sort of the big money job and the corporate job, was it that you didn't feel like it was fulfilling you, Or because what it sounded like was you also didn't believe in the way you were recruiting, that you were recruiting with money, you were recruiting with perks. You weren't recruiting for the passions of the people and what they could get that would fulfill them in their lives.
Yes, true. It was about money. It was about more, more, more. Nobody was ever satisfied. Even the people we placed not, because after 1 year we had to call them, hey, maybe we can bring you to another place what pays more. And that was so not my world. So there wasn't no other option. I had to go.
Were you an executive recruiter or were you high tech? Which domain?
General executive, sales, finance, a little bit tech.
And importantly there, what they were pursuing was not satisfying them. Is that one reason why the turnover was high?
I think so, but that's what I see now. At that time, it was just I said, hey, this is not my world. I speak with clients who aren't interested in the people, they are interested in the fee they have to pay. I have to talk with professionals who aren't interested in the tasks they have to do, but are interested in the salary and in the benefits. It was so superficial that I said, no, I go because there are people, I'm sure, are crying for work, who want to show their talents, what they have. I'm going to help those people.
When did you start finding success? And when did you start to know that you were going the right direction?
Interesting question, because what's success? The first 3 years were financially horrible because I never worked for myself. I had no income. Most companies said, hey, Eugène, we don't pay you because from the local community you get these kind of people for free. But I continued and I found myself successful because when I looked in the eyes after a good match from the person just got to her, yes, you got the job. And I saw the gratitude, the belief, I saw life. It's no money, but I felt rich. And I felt seen and heard and I felt important. So that was success for me. In 2015, when there came the big peak in refugees entering the country, and they asked me from, hey, Eugène, do you want to meet a couple of refugees? Because they have to go to work, but we don't have any idea how. It felt like a success. They asked me, hey, apparently I do something differently. And I had a cup of coffee with 4 young guys, early in their 30s, who spoke fluently English, no word Dutch, but high educated. And I said, wow, I am doing some phone calls in my network. If I can get a job to them. And within 3 weeks, I had them in a job. I said, hey, this is working. And that was the start of, well, the last 6, 7 years of a big story, which feels more and more and more successful because the stage is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. More and more people I've helped, but also because the story is going on, more and more companies are calling me and say, hey, Eugène, do you think someone from these kind of communities can also fit in our organization? So, yeah, that's success for me.
And has it always been refugees?
No, also to clients I say, I don't give a shit, sorry, who the man or woman is who is going to do the job. If she has the skills, the motivation, and it's a match, I don't mind if what's his color of eyes, color of hair, or what kind of shoes she wears. I want to find the right person. And yes, I look in the communities who are underrepresented. And yes, the last 7 years, there were a lot of refugees who not only brought their stories really sad, but who also brought their knowledge, their dreams, their experience, their skills. So it's logical that the last 7 years I've made a lot of matches from this group because they brought so many interesting knowledge and experience.
Is there a particular success story that when you're having a hard day, you look back on and say, that's the sort of thing that I can do?
A lot. Then I read between the recommendations they send me in, for example, LinkedIn, and where people really say, hey, Eugène not just brought a job to me, he brought life to me, he brought hope to me. And there's a story of a man in his 40s, PhD in computer science, born in Jemen. He arrived in the Netherlands. You think, hey, in this job market, with a PhD in computer science, it has to be easy to get a job. But no, rejection after rejection, he lost hope. And when I met him, he said, hey, Eugène, maybe you have to help me to find an entry-level job because what I can do now it won't work. I said, hey, I'm not going to accept that. I have a big network. I'm going to do some goals. So I called some organizations in the higher education and said, hey, I have here a good researcher, good lecturer for you with experience and also rejection. Yes, Eugène, he doesn't speak Dutch. I said, no, but your students speak English. Yeah, but still, from a researcher, from a lecturer, we want them to speak Dutch also because, hey, we are in the Netherlands. And then there was a recruiter who said, hey, I want to introduce this man to our team, to the higher school in Amsterdam. Then they say, hey, we don't mind. We are really looking a long time for people like this. And well, that he doesn't speak Dutch, he can learn Dutch. We can help him to learn Dutch better. A professor who speaks English and can teach and can share his knowledge and passion than no teacher. So let's bring him in, let's have a coffee, and let's see if there is a click. And it clicked. And he started this January his full-time job. So those experiences are gold, are gold. And in bad days, and when I receive another no, or another rejection, or another closed door, I just have to think to all those stories where finally it was a yes.
Have you found leaders in organizations who recognize the kind of legacy that they can build by hiring people and giving people that chance?
Yes, and more and more. And what's very beautiful was one remark of an HR manager. She said, Eugène, I'm already more than 20 years in this business in our HR role. When you called me for a cup of coffee, I said immediately, yes, we are going to hire also a couple of refugees. And immediately I thought to some entry level jobs. And she said, with my decades of experience, I didn't realize that these people also have their master, their experience, speak the English and can do staff functions, sales functions, do the higher functions. So that was really fantastic to see her learning a big lesson in that moment.
Something you said early on in the conversation was that a part of what you do is you change people's respect for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Where do people start when it comes to they've been off the job market for a while and they're having those struggles? And how do you raise them up to the point where they can have aspiration again?
It starts by listening to them and to invite them to share their stories, their ideas. A lot of employers complain about, hey, I want to hire diverse or I want to hire inclusive, but where are the candidates? We don't find them on LinkedIn. When we have job vacancies, they don't react. Where are they? And when I started, I went to the language school I went every day. I went to the thrift stores, to the food banks, because there are these candidates. And I just put myself there near the coffee counter, drank coffee, and was open to talk. And the first times they said, "Hey, what's that for a strange guy? Who is he?" But after a couple of days, they say, "Hey, there is he again. Let's have a little chat." And piece by piece by piece, they started to trust me. They with the grown trust, they also started to share more stories, not the stories about their flights, but about their aspirations or about their what they did in their country, what they studied, or what they hope to do in the Netherlands. And there I said, hey, if you were, for example, a plumber there, hey, I know a plumber. I will call him and ask if he's open to meet you just for a cup of coffee. And I think when two people who both have a passion for plumbing talk with each other, within 5 minutes, they know, hey, we can cooperate, we can help each other, yes or no. We don't need a resume. We don't need a job vacancy. We just need 5 minutes, a good cup of coffee or tea or water, but attention for each other. And that's how I started. And the fun was that very soon that those people said, hey, if you need a job or if you want to talk with someone who really listens to you, please call Eugène. This is his number. Send him a message via WhatsApp. He answers, he listens. He doesn't have the jobs, but at least he makes time for you. So it started.
And do you find that you develop networks within a particular refugee community? So, for instance, word starts to spread among the Syrian population or among the Ukrainian population.
Yes, but it grew. It was not that I was looking for those communities. They came to me because I went to the places where they came together. The people from Eritrea, Syria, Iran, and Ukraine, because they came at the language school all together. And I was there, the white man. I went to the mosque. I said, hey, I never have been to a mosque, but if I want to help you, I need to understand you. And I'm curious to you. Hey, who can invite me so I can come in and see it? They say, hey, Eugène, most people want to help us, talk a lot, and say, hey, we know a solution. Follow me. We can go have a job there. You listen and you come to us. You come to our place. You come to where we do our shopping. If we invite you to our homes, you came there. You took your children with you, and then they spread the message. So then it became huge. Then the network became enormous.
That's such an incredibly labor-intensive way to recruit. It's so labor-intensive. It's true retail. It's retail, on the ground, relationship-based recruiting.
Absolutely. And I've read the books, I follow the podcasts and everything about tech, and how can we make it faster? Yes, but I believe, and that's why I love the name Just for Humanity, put in the human factor, because it's the human factor what makes the difference. The most people in these groups, refugees, but also the elderly, also the returning citizens, they don't have a good resume. They don't have a big profile on LinkedIn, but they are full of stories. So if you are open to listen to those stories and to invite them to share their stories, and then you will share those stories with the companies, the hiring managers, yes, it's time in consuming, but at the same time, it's also success. So yeah, that's my way.
Yeah. You know, one thing about that kind of retail recruiting, because I was a recruiter for a decade and I was a recruiter before LinkedIn. And recruiting before LinkedIn was manual labor. You had to get in the car and you had to drive to the International Society of Procurement Engineers or something. And you had to go in there and you had to go to their certification courses, and they had a binder of resumes of people that were interesting. And then you had to look up the references and call the references on the resumes, because that expanded your network. It was manual. It was a manual job. And there's a way in which things like LinkedIn have made us lazy, which is we think everything's going to be online. We're going to be able to find it. Well, there's a thinness to what you can find on LinkedIn. And some of that thinness is because of language barriers. Some of that thinness is because of neurodivergence. But a lot of it is you just can't get that into a computer, whatever it is that you're finding when you meet people. When you meet people at the mosque, or when you meet people at the market or at the thrift shop, you're getting a read on people that's never going to come across in LinkedIn.
True. And when I was called 4 or 5 years ago by a huge company in Rotterdam in logistics, they have also businesses in, I thought, 26 countries in the world. They said, hey, Eugène, do you think that we need some junior ICT people, help desk people? Do you think among your community of refugees, there will be some candidates? I said, yes, I'm sure. Say, okay, maybe you want to come over so we can talk about the job vacancy, blah, blah, blah. I said, no, I don't need that. I'm so sure. Invite me for next Friday, so in 2 days. And I have a big car because we have 4 kids. And I take 5 people with me, 5 different people, male, female, all in ICT help desk from different countries. And please offer us water, coffee, tea, and biscuits. We will have a talk from about 1 hour. Then we go home. And the next day I will call you and ask you about your ideas, thoughts, experience about the 5 people I've invited. I will also do the same with those 5 people. And we came there. They said, wow, Eugène, what a fantastic people. You even brought in a lady from China. I said, yes, because your biggest partner is in China. And how easy is it when here's a new coworker who speaks Chinese? Yes, wow. She doesn't speak Dutch, no, but she does speak Chinese and English. And he is from Iran, and he is from Syria. So that was an amazing experience. They hired the people, but also the director of ICT there became my big ambassador. And she spread this story and said, hey, within 2 days, this guy brought us 5 fantastic candidates without resume. Well, our recruitment team was searching already for months and months and months.
Yeah, brought them in his own car.
Yes.
Had to go around picking them up and bring them over.
Yes, that's fun. These 5 candidates, I still have contact. And they made a career. Some stayed in that company. Others went. I didn't brought them a job. I brought them a career.
So let me ask, with the last 10 minutes, the question that I asked Roy, which is, Eugène, what do you hire your job to do for you?
I think also because of the language barrier, if I understand the question well.
It's not a language barrier. It's a weird question.
Okay.
It's a weird question.
Yeah.
You might already have an answer, but I just happen to have a candle here. If you hire a candle to give you light, if you hire a drill to make a hole,
yeah,
what do you hire your job to do for you?
Enjoy life in all the colors, in all the aspects, in all the beautiful parts life has to bring. There are a lot of tears of pain, tears of sadness, and tears of joy. That will be my answer. I'm so grateful that I'm leading life, business, work as I do now, and also be the example to my kids that I see the news or read newspapers and see all the sad news there is in the world, I realize that, hey, together we can make a change, can make impact, we can bring hope, even if it's just for one person, because one by one, together, we can make an ocean of impact.
And what does your job cost you?
The color of my hair, I'm now gray, a lot of time, a lot of patience, frustration sometimes, and it's hard to think in what it cost to me because the reward is so big. As I told you earlier, when I was working in my job 12, 13 years ago, I was driving the big company car and I had a card to eat in the fancy restaurants and to introduce clients and professionals and all that stuff. The community thought I was rich, I made a career, but I felt poor and lonely. Now I drive an ordinary car. Sometimes it's counting the euros and counting the days till the end of the month. But I feel rich, I feel blessed, I feel grateful, I feel surrounded with a lot of people who love me, also say they love me, will also promise they will help me if one day I need help. So I feel safe. And that's the best feeling in the world.
How can people learn more about you?
Invite me for LinkedIn. Send me an invitation. Every invitation I answer with a short personal message and say, hey, let's start the contact. Let's start the conversation. I am curious to your story and why you have sent me an invitation. And let's make the world a little bit better together. So it starts with a little message on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. And it'll be, for people who are driving and can't look at their phone, your name is, we were saying Eugène, but it's spelled like Eugene, Eugene, Vanden Hemel. So VAN space DEN space HEMEL, Vanden Hemel. Thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for the stage to spread my story, my passion, my mission. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.